The mountains don't forget. They don't forgive, and some spirits were never meant to be disturbed. In the northern reaches of the Pacific Range, where the air thins and the trees grow old enough to whisper secrets between their roots, there is a place that the maps avoid and the locals won't name. Not because it's lost, but because something else has claimed it. It starts with silence, not the kind that soothes, the kind that listens, the kind that waits. Hikers have said the air feels heavier the deeper they go. Experienced trackers have watched animal prints vanish mid-trail as if the creature had been lifted straight into the sky. Radios die without warning, compasses spin, and the deeper you push, the more you feel it. That feeling that you are being watched. Not by eyes, but by presence. The stories from this region aren't told in casual conversation. They're spoken behind closed doors, over firelight, passed down in half-whispers from those who still remember the old warnings. Warnings that weren't metaphors, warnings that were meant to keep people alive. There are no welcome signs here, no campsites, no visitor centers, just forest, dense, endless forest. And above it, jagged peaks that seem to lean in on themselves, forming a natural barrier, as if even the mountains are trying to hold something in. The tribal elders say the land beyond those ridgelines is sacred, but not in the way outsiders understand. It's not blessed. It's guarded. And the things that do the guarding, they don't use words. They don't warn twice. One elder, who finally agreed to speak after nearly 40 years, said this: "There are places in this world where the ground remembers every step ever taken on it, where the trees carry the breath of those who walked among them long before us. And in some of those places, that breath still lingers. It waits, it watches, and when it's disrespected, it answers." This is one of those places. Over the years, strange disappearances have been quietly documented in the surrounding areas. Campers who left behind undisturbed gear, but were never found. Rangers who followed distress signals only to report being turned around in daylight, miles from where they were supposed to be. Hunters who returned pale, confused, refusing to speak about what they saw or what they heard. And then there are those who came back with stories so strange, so difficult to believe. They were dismissed, brushed aside, until more stories followed, until the patterns became too strong to ignore. What you're about to hear is one of those stories. It began as a simple trip, a man returning to familiar trails, looking to reconnect with the land his grandfather once hunted on. But what he found was not what he was seeking, because something was already there, something that had been there long before him, and it had no intention of being forgotten. This is a true story, verified through interviews, personal journals, and the word of those who live closest to the edge of this wilderness. Some details have been withheld for protection. Others, we left exactly as they were told. The mountains are still there. The trail is still there. But if you ever find yourself walking it, and the forest suddenly goes quiet, stop, because if you hear nothing, it might already be too late. They called it Whistler's Ridge, but no one could quite agree on why. Some say the name came from the winds that sweep through the canyons, sharp, high-pitched gusts that echo unnaturally off the stone. Others say it was the sound of something else entirely, something that mimics, something that calls back. It sits quietly at the far edge of what used to be tribal hunting territory, the kind of landscape that looks untouched, jagged cliffs, glacial lakes, tree canopies so thick they blot out the sun even at noon. But the elders in the region never considered it untouched. They said it was claimed, not by man, not by beast, but by something older, something that sees without eyes and remembers long after everyone else forgets. The land, they said, was awake. It listens, and sometimes it answers back. In the summer of 2022, a group of friends set out to hike through a stretch of trail that wrapped around the ridge's northern base, mostly undocumented terrain. A few Forest Service paths, overgrown logging roads, a couple of unofficial waypoints passed through hiker forums, always marked with a warning: plan your route well, and don't stray from it. There were 4 of them, 20-somethings, friends from college. 2 were siblings, Tom and Eli. Their father had grown up in a nearby town, used to fish in those mountains with his own grandfather. Another was Jess, who brought her DSLR and a drone, determined to capture some backcountry footage for a photography project. And the last was Danny. Danny had a vlog. Most of it was jokes, gear reviews, watch me almost fall off a cliff type content. But this time he said he was going to document a real adventure. He'd heard about Whistler's Ridge from Eli, thought the legends were funny, creepy in that internet way, the kind of stuff that made for clicks. Early in the footage, you can hear him laugh as they cross into the deeper woods. All right, folks, into the wilderness we go. If you don't hear from us in 3 days, tell my dog I love him. They were prepared, by most definitions. Tents, satellite phone, maps, water filtration. But there's no gear for what they were walking into. Not for that land. Tom was the only one who seemed cautious. You can hear it in his voice during one of the early vlog clips, recorded while they rest beside an old tree with hand-carved markings on it. My grandfather used to say the land out here remembers what's been taken from it. He'd leave tobacco when he hunted. Said it wasn't about tradition, it was about respect. Eli rolled his eyes. Jess snapped pictures. Danny laughed. But the warnings weren't symbolic. They were earned. Decades ago, during the logging surge of the late 1960s, crews pushed further into the forest than ever before. Chainsaws echoed through valleys that hadn't heard machinery in centuries. That's when they unearthed something. A totem, half buried beneath moss and shale. Not carved with animals or tribal figures, but with distorted, jagged shapes. The loggers who uncovered it were never seen again. Not a trace, not even their equipment. The company sealed the incident, blamed a rock slide. But records show something odd. Work crews refused to return to the site. One foreman, in a brief note, wrote, "There's something in that soil that doesn't want to be touched." But the legends go even further back. In 1893, an entire band of people, an isolated branch of the local tribe, vanished without explanation. Their lodges still stood, fires still burned, no signs of struggle, no tracks leaving the camp, no signs of life. Just gone. The surrounding tribes refused to enter the area after that. They called it the place the earth swallowed. Fast forward to now. The hikers continue upward, unaware of how many stories were buried beneath their boots. On the second day, they crossed a threshold. There was no marker on the map, no line drawn. But something changed. Danny's footage shows it clearly. The trees grow wider apart, the undergrowth thins, birdsong stops. Even the wind holds its breath. Jess said it felt like stepping into a room where someone had just been speaking and gone silent. Like they had walked in on something, interrupted it. At the edge of a narrow ridgeline, they passed a wooden sign. Old, weather-worn, half buried in ferns, letters barely visible under moss and rot. But the camera caught it, just for a second. Leave gifts, walk lightly, do not whistle. Danny laughed when he read it, even whistled, mocking the warning. That was the last time any of them heard laughter on that trip. because something heard them, something that had been waiting, and now it wasn't waiting anymore. The forest began to change, not suddenly, not with thunder or screams, but with stillness, a kind of stillness that makes the inside of your chest tighten, even when everything around you appears calm. The birds stopped singing, the squirrels stopped moving. Even the insects disappeared. No hum, no buzz, no chirping in the grass. Just silence, long, stretched, watching. It was Eli who noticed it first, noticed that the shadows weren't behaving the way they should, that as they moved, the light didn't follow naturally, like the forest was playing tricks, or worse, obeying different rules. On the third morning, Jess swore she saw something watching her, not through the trees, not across the trail, from within a tree. She froze mid-step. Called the others. They brushed it off, said it was pareidolia, our brain's habit of seeing faces in places where there aren't any, but Jess insisted. She said it wasn't a face she saw, it was eyes, eyes that blinked, and then disappeared. That night, Tom didn't sleep well. He tossed and turned inside his tent, eventually falling into a fitful, dreamless state. When he woke, his hands were caked in dirt, packed beneath his fingernails. He hadn't left the tent. No one could explain it. Jess checked for signs of sleepwalking. There were no footprints, nothing disturbed around his tent, just that dark, damp earth and his trembling hands. The next day, the compass began to fail, not flicker, not wobble. It spun, endlessly, violently. Even digital GPS apps stopped responding, screens freezing or crashing altogether. The forest, it seemed, no longer wanted them to know where they were. Danny kept filming, always filming. But even the footage began to shift. Grain crept in where there should have been clarity. Frames stuttered, audio warped, like something breathing beneath the wind. They thought it was just the cold, a glitch, fog in the lens. Then they found the totem. It wasn't on the map, it wasn't supposed to be there. 6 feet tall, carved from cedar blackened by age. The wood was cracked, split in places, as though struck by lightning long ago. But what stopped them? Cold. What made Danny lower his camera for the first time was that it was wet. Thick, dark fluid seeped from a gouge just beneath the upper carving. Jess touched it, then recoiled. It wasn't sap. It wasn't moisture from rain. It was warm. Tom bent down and placed his hand near the base. The earth beneath it was soft, freshly turned, as if something had recently been buried or unburied. They stood there for nearly a minute saying nothing. The wind picked up again, but this time it didn't move the trees. Only the sound moved, whistling through nothing. That's when they heard the voice. From behind them, a calm, tired voice said, "You shouldn't be here." They turned and found a man standing near the trail. Late 50s, park ranger uniform, no vehicle, no sound of approach, just there, watching them. He didn't ask questions, didn't smile. His name tag read Red Elk. He looked at each of them one by one and said, "You're already too deep, they've noticed you." Danny tried to laugh it off, tried to film. Red Elk raised a hand, and the battery on the camera died, fully charged, now completely empty. Jess stepped forward, asked what he meant by they. He didn't answer, not right away. Instead, he walked past them, toward the totem, placed a bundle of dried herbs at its base, lit a match, let the smoke rise, and only then did he speak again. The ridge isn't empty. It never was. There are things here that remember the wars, the pain, the promises broken beneath the pines. You stepped where you were never meant to walk. You left no offering. You walked heavy, and you whistled. No one spoke, not even Danny. Red Elk turned to go, then stopped. If they follow you tonight, don't answer, not even if it sounds like one of your friends. That's how they try to get close. And just like that, he was gone. No sound, no tracks. As if the forest had opened, let him pass, then closed again behind him. They stood alone, just the four of them, in a forest that felt like it was breathing, and somewhere, far off, something began to whistle. They didn't want to set up camp that night, not after the warning, not after the look in that ranger's eyes, but they were tired, and worse, they were disoriented. The trail had bent in ways that didn't match the maps. Landmarks were missing, others had moved. It was Eli who suggested the clearing, a flat patch of grass between two rock faces. No trees. Quiet. Too quiet. Tom hesitated, said something didn't feel right about the place, said the grass looked pressed down as if something large had been laying there. But Danny waved him off. We just need rest. Tomorrow we'll recalibrate, double back, find a marked trail. They pitched the tents, started a fire, ate in silence. The sun dipped, and the shadows stretched. By 10:30 p.m., the forest was black, the kind of black that feels close to your skin, and that's when the drums began. Low, distant. At first, they thought it was thunder, but the sound didn't echo. It thumped, like something hollow being struck rhythmically, deliberately, drawing nearer. No one said a word. They just listened. Each beat a step closer. Eli checked his watch. 11:08 p.m. Jess scanned the darkness with her flashlight, but the beam felt weak, like it couldn't break the edge of the clearing. The fire popped, wavered, then went out. Just gone. The embers should have glowed, but even those faded too fast, like the flames had been taken rather than extinguished. Danny tried to restart it. 5 times. Nothing caught. The darkness didn't just return. It closed in. That's when it happened. From across the camp, they heard Danny's voice. Hey, can one of you toss me the lighter? But Danny was standing right next to Eli. Everyone froze. Jess whispered, You heard that too? Tom answered without looking away from the tree line. That was your voice, man. But it wasn't you. No one moved. Then, just outside the clearing, something shifted. Leaves didn't crunch, branches didn't snap, but something moved, and the air changed, went heavy, still, like the moment before an earthquake. Jess lifted her camera, pressed record. The screen stayed black at first, but a few minutes later, the footage would show something the naked eye never saw. A tall shape. Thin, unnaturally so, crooked at the shoulders, a head angled sideways like it didn't understand how to balance. It stood at the edge of the light, just outside where the fire had been. Still, watching. For 5 minutes, the figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The others didn't see it, but Jess's camera did. Then, one by one, the sound stopped. No drums, no wind, just breathing. And then, less than that, Eli was the first to notice. Where's Tom? They spun around. His tent was zipped. His gear was there. But he was gone. No voice, no footsteps, no disturbance. Just gone. Like the darkness had reached out and taken something back. Jess ran to the tree line, calling his name. Danny screamed, furious, confused, thinking it was a prank. Eli tore open Tom's tent, empty, still warm. They searched in circles for half an hour. Nothing. And the worst part? Tom's boots were still at the edge of his sleeping bag, untouched. No one could explain how a person leaves barefoot. In total silence, without leaving a single print in soft dirt. Jess replayed the footage, frame by frame, and that's when they saw it. In the moment, the fire went out. The figure moved. Just once. Not toward the camera. Toward Tom's tent. And then it wasn't there. It had never been there. At least not to the eye. But the camera remembered, just like the forest. That night, none of them slept. They sat in silence, lights off, listening to the trees shift around them, knowing something was still out there, and it wasn't finished yet. By dawn, they were already unraveling. The night had left its mark, not just on their minds, but on the world around them. The trees looked the same. The sky was still overcast. But something, subtle, had shifted. The forest no longer felt like a place. It felt like a presence. They packed quickly, kept close, and without a word, started walking. Danny led, his compass dangling from his wrist, spinning. Eli tracked their movement by his watch, marking the sun's position. Jess watched the tree bark, trying to remember the markings from their way in. They walked for nearly 2 hours, making careful turns, choosing new paths, but eventually, they stopped. Jess dropped her pack first, stared at the fallen log in front of them, covered in moss, split halfway down the center. She recognized it. They all did. It was the same log they'd passed that morning, the one Tom had tripped over. Danny walked ahead, furious, took a wide arc around the log. 10 minutes later, he was standing in front of it again. No trail markers, no visual illusions, just back where they started. The woods, it seemed, had folded. The second attempt was more desperate. They spread out slightly, keeping each other in sight, but trying different routes. Eli walked due east, keeping the sun to his right. He moved quick, focused, measured his steps. 45 minutes later, he returned to the log from the opposite side. That's when he realized something else. His watch had stopped. The time hadn't changed in over an hour, but the shadows on the ground were longer. Jess pulled out her phone. Dead. Danny's was too. Eli tried his power bank. It drained in seconds. Battery icon flickered and vanished. Technology wasn't dying. It was being emptied. Jess checked her GPS. The screen glitched, then loaded coordinates that made no sense. 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds north. 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds east. The middle of the ocean. Jess laughed, but it cracked in her throat. Eli looked at her, his voice quiet. It's not messing with us. It's removing us from everything. Danny was the last to try something reckless. He turned on his camcorder, pointed it at himself, just to prove he was still real. He stared into the lens and said, "My name is Danny Walker. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm not afraid of this place." Hours later, when Jess played it back, Danny wasn't alone in the frame. For a split second, behind him, between the trees, a shape. Human height. No face. Skin the color of clay. It stood with its hands at its sides, head slightly tilted. No sound, no movement. Just there. Then gone. Jess paused the frame. Showed it to Eli. They didn't speak, and then the smell hit them. Metallic. Sour. Thick, like it came from beneath the earth. They followed it instinctively. Not thinking, just drawn. Less than 50 yards into the tree line, they found it. A clearing that hadn't been there the day before. A ring of stones. At the center, a low altar, carved from a single slab of obsidian dark rock. No moss, no dirt. Clean. Too clean. And on the surface, fresh blood. Still warm. Jess touched it, then recoiled. Not just warm, it pulsed. Like it had a rhythm, a beat. Danny stepped forward, filming again, his hands shaking. The camera glitched, screen blurred, and then a whisper, software, female, right next to his ear. "Don't leave offerings you don't mean." He spun. Nothing. Jess's camera caught the wind bending around the altar. Not over it, around it, like the air was avoiding contact. And then, the trees around the clearing began to shift. Not sway, shift. Slowly, imperceptibly, trunks no longer aligned. Roots reoriented. The path they'd taken to reach the altar was gone. They stood in the middle of that ancient place, no trail, no direction, and one person short, still breathing, but no longer sure. If they were on the same side of the mountain they started on, or even in the same world. Morning came, or something that looked like it. There was no scream in the night, no crashing through the trees, no strange lights, just silence. And then birdsong, the kind you hear in travel documentaries, bright, chirping, familiar. Jess opened her eyes first. For a full 5 seconds, she believed, really believed, they'd imagined it all. The forest looked brighter, the trees gentler. Eli stood outside his tent, breathing, not speaking, but his eyes were red. He hadn't slept. Danny laughed when he saw the trail marker, a bright orange strip tied to a birch tree, just like the ones posted by the forestry department, the kind meant to guide hikers out when they got turned around. There it was, 20 yards from camp, a path leading clean and open between two ridgelines. Jess smiled. Eli exhaled for the first time in hours. "We made it," Danny said. For a little while, they believed it. They walked, talked again, made nervous jokes. Jess filmed a short update on her phone. "We were just lost. That's all. No ghosts, no monsters. Just got turned around. See you all back at base." It should have been comforting, but it wasn't, because something didn't sit right. They didn't remember seeing that birch tree before. None of them did. And the birdsong? It repeated. Same 5-note call, over and over. No variation, no flutters. Eli was the first to stop walking. He looked up, shielded his eyes, and frowned. "Sun hasn't moved," he said. Jess checked her phone. It was 11:13 a.m., but the sun was still sitting low, peaking just over the eastern ridge, same place it had been 2 hours ago. They turned to check their shadows. And that's when the second thing clicked. Their shadows weren't pointing west or even north. They bent toward the sun, as if the light wasn't casting them, but pulling them, stretching them forward, unnaturally long and too sharp at the edges. Jess raised her camera to check her framing. She captured Eli walking. Later, when she played that footage back, his reflection in the lens moved, just a little slower than his body. Not lag, not distortion. Like the version in the glass was thinking about moving, then deciding to do it. In one frame. It even looked to the side, away from the camera. But Eli hadn't. She didn't tell him right away. Just lowered the camera and kept walking. Then came the clearing. Wide, quiet. A flat stretch of pine needle-covered ground with a tall, clean rock wall at the end. On that wall, painted in red ochre, faded and weathered, was a symbol. A spiral of lines, interlocked hands, faces without eyes. Danny stared at it. That wasn't in any ranger book. Eli stepped closer, ran his fingers just above the paint. "It's not paint." Jess leaned in. The lines were grooved, etched into the stone itself, and the color was deeper than red, like it had soaked in. Below the drawing, carved in English, though older, with letters slightly off, was a warning. "They do not want to be understood." Jess looked around. The forest was still quiet. Then Danny pointed. There, beyond the clearing, the trail split again. 2 paths, one marked with an old sign, weathered, almost unreadable, the other clean, straight, too neat. They voted, without speaking, chose the messy path. The trail narrowed, became tighter, trees closer, and then, just ahead, Jess saw a glint, another reflection, like glass. She leaned closer. It was a piece of an old mirror, cracked, rusted around the edges, propped between two rocks. She caught her own reflection, then blinked, because in the mirror, the trees were wrong. They didn't move the same. And behind her, in the reflection, stood another Jess, face slack, eyes open too wide. Jess stumbled back, fell. When she looked again, the mirror only showed trees. Danny helped her up. "It's just stress," he said, but his hand was shaking. By now, the forest felt still again. No breeze, no birds, just expectation, like it was holding its breath. They kept walking, past roots that moved when they weren't looking, past shadows that turned corners without making sound. They were being led, not out, not back, somewhere else entirely. And the worst part? Jess started to feel calm, like maybe this was what the forest wanted, to wear them down, not with fear, but with false hope. Give them laughter, a trail, morning light, make them think they were safe, just long enough, to lead them where the real story begins. They should have turned back, but by now there was no direction to turn. Forward was the only illusion left. The path narrowed until it vanished entirely. The trees thickened, growing closer at unnatural angles. Branches curled like reaching fingers. Then, a sound broke the stillness. Leaves crunching, a branch snapping. Footsteps, staggered, uneven. They turned. Eli raised the camcorder, and from between the trunks, the ranger emerged, or what was left of him. His face was slashed across the cheek, shirt torn, a bone, maybe his, jutting at a wrong angle beneath the skin. He fell to his knees, looked up at them with blood in his teeth, and said, "You weren't supposed to stay after the drums. You're marked." Danny knelt beside him, tried to help. The ranger grabbed his wrist with a strength that didn't match his injuries, pulled him close. "Don't speak. Don't repeat what you've heard. If they hear you, mimic them." He trailed off, eyes unfocused. Jess asked what he meant. He shook his head, coughed once, and whispered a word none of them understood. The camcorder caught it. 6 syllables, echoing in a strange cadence, almost like it didn't belong in human throat. Then he was gone. Just gone. No last breath, no collapse, just a stillness that moved through the group like ice water. They buried him with branches, said nothing. That night, Eli was the first to speak in tongues. Jess was keeping the night watch, sitting by the fire. When Eli sat up, eyes closed, and began chanting in a low, rhythmic voice. It wasn't nonsense. It had structure, like he was reciting something ancient. Jess shook him. He kept going, louder, until blood trickled from his nose. She slapped him once. He gasped awake, eyes wide, didn't remember it. Danny didn't sleep, just stared into the fire. The next morning, they found marks on his arms. Not scratches, symbols, dozens of them, carved delicately, precise and symmetrical, too clean for sleep movement, too intentional. Jess filmed it in silence. Later, compared it to old photos in the ranger's guidebook. They matched markings found on a set of canoes discovered in 1893, after the tribe in these mountains vanished. That same day, the laughter started. At first, faint, distant, a child's voice, light, giggling, almost cheerful. Jess froze mid-step, looked at the others. "Did you hear?" Then it laughed again, closer. Danny whispered, "There's no one else out here." The sound moved, in circles, behind them, then far away, then right next to Jess's ear. They ran, didn't speak, just ran. The forest didn't fight them. It let them run, guided them, until they reached the riverbed. There they paused, hands on knees, breathing ragged. Then the laughter returned. But this time, it was Jess's voice. Not similar. Exact. Her pitch, her rhythm, laughing like she did on a video from 3 days earlier when they first arrived. Then Eli's voice joined it. Then Danny's. Each laugh now twisted, echoed too long, overlaying itself like a skipping tape. They stood back to back. The trees no longer whispered. They listened. And then the screaming began. High, piercing, a child at first, then deeper, older, male, then female. All in their own voices. Eli covered his ears, dropped to his knees. Jess screamed, but nothing came out. Danny ran the camcorder in a panic, filming everything. The frame jittered, picked up heat signatures that didn't match the air. 6 figures, watching from the trees. Not moving, not breathing, just there. The forest had stopped pretending. Whatever rules they thought they understood, they were gone. Now they belonged to the mountain, and the mountain was beginning to respond. It had been stalking them for hours, or maybe they had been stalking it. Jess couldn't tell anymore. Reality was bent, twisted. They moved as if walking through thick glass, each step unsure, each breath too shallow. There was no more sound, no wind, no distant animals. Just the slow drag of their feet over the soft, damp ground. Then, the smell. Burning. Not fire, not smoke. Charred flesh. Burnt bone. The scent of decay, long left to rot, hanging like a heavy cloud in the air. It came from the trees, from the shadows. And then, it stepped into the clearing. Jess saw it first, not clearly at first, not with her eyes, but in the corner of her vision, moving between the trunks. Then, like a predator drawing in its prey, it shifted, solidified. A thing not of the forest, but made by it. It was built of charred wood, bones, twisted vines, all bound together with something unnatural, smoke trailing from the gaps where its limbs connected. Its face. It was wrong. Not one face, but many. Eyes. Eyes that had belonged to people. Eyes that stared out from the blackened skin and hollowed sockets. Faces warped and layered, all shifting, all morphing in a fluid cycle. Jess gasped, stepping backward. The others turned. Eli's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His face went white. "Don't look at it," he whispered. But the creature didn't move closer. It watched them, standing still, like a nightmare, only half understood. The ranger's words rang out in Jess's mind. "It's not a spirit." And then they saw it more clearly, and what the ranger really meant hit them all at once. It wasn't a spirit. It was a punishment. The creature shifted again, its face warping and melting into something else. And then, for the first time, Jess saw her own face, eyes wide, horror-stricken, a reflection of herself, only twisted and warped in the same blackened skin as the thing before her. Her heart stopped, and the others began to panic. But what came next was far worse. One by one, they all began to see it. Their faces, too. Faces they hadn't thought of in years. Faces they wished they could forget. It began with Eli, his reflection distorted in the creature's mask, his younger self, smiling that same carefree grin that had led him to wander into the woods in the first place. "Eli," Jess whispered, but he didn't answer. He was staring at that twisted version of himself, laughing through the smoke, the cracks in its skin. And then, like some horrible, sickening thing pulling on the strings of his heart, Eli dropped to his knees. His hand went to his chest, clawed, like something was inside, moving, ripping him apart. "Eli, no!" Danny shouted, pulling him back, but it was too late. The beast didn't strike with claws. It didn't need to. It was their guilt. Their actions, silent, pressing, manifested. And Eli's guilt bled him dry, leaving him gasping, weak. Jess turned only to find herself alone, but not alone. Her reflection in the creature's face stared back at her, eyes hollow and lost. Her hands still stained with the blood of past actions, the faces of those she had hurt. The monster was no longer outside, it had slipped inside them, inside their very minds. Danny, too, began to scream. He tried to run, his feet moving, but the forest seemed to move with him. No matter where he turned, it followed, until he was running in circles, chasing his own demons. And then, the worst part. The child's laugh started again, that same high-pitched, innocent sound, but this time, it was no longer a laugh. It twisted, contorted, and screamed in Danny's voice, calling out, pleading, like he was still alive, still trapped in the monster's grip. And then, the creature moved. It didn't need to, it didn't have to. It was already there, always had been. The forest, the guilt, the smoke. It had already claimed them. The ground beneath them gave way. Every step seemed wrong. Each breath came jagged, forced, air too thin, too hard to swallow. They ran. Or maybe they were being run, like marionettes, dragged along by strings they couldn't see. Jess's legs burned. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. There was no escape. The forest pressed in from all sides, its trees stretching, folding in on them, bending to its will. She turned back, a glance over her shoulder, and saw Eli's eyes. But they weren't Eli's eyes anymore. They were dark, hollow. They burned with the fury of something that wasn't alive. The thing chasing them wasn't some beast or spirit. It was vengeance made flesh. Behind her, the sound grew louder, ripping, the tearing of fabric, the snapping of bones. And then, out of nowhere, she heard it. The scream. One of them, Danny, she thought, was still behind, stumbling as if his body couldn't keep up with his mind. And then, it grabbed him. Invisible claws sank into his shoulders. His feet skidded, dragging through the earth as his body twisted. Something was pulling him back, pulling him toward the heart of the forest. His mouth opened in agony. No sound came out. No time, no air, just the violence of something unseen, crushing him from all directions. Jess screamed his name, but the forest ate the sound. She looked at the camcorder. The screen was shaking, distorted, but it recorded something. Two versions of Danny, arguing. One stood in front of the other, the camcorder catching the heated exchange. But something was wrong. One version of Danny was melting, his skin curling back, darkening. The camcorder picked up the shadowy, smoke-like residue around him, the ash of something that had never been human. The other turned and screamed. In that moment, both versions dissolved. One into dust, the other into nothingness. Eli turned to Jess, eyes wide in fear, mouth open to speak. But then, silence. The others, the ones who had been with them, the ones who had seen it all, were gone. Just traces, shadows of the ones they used to be, flickering in and out of existence. All except Jess. She couldn't feel her legs anymore, they were numb. The forest, though, kept pushing forward. It moved. It was always moving. It wasn't a place anymore. It was a thing. And then they found the cave. A black hole in the earth, a gaping mouth to the world below. Jess's heart stumbled in her chest. There was refuge, a place to hide, to breathe, to forget, or so she thought. They entered the cave, knees scraping the sharp rocks that led down into its throat. But as they descended into the darkness, the pulse began. First, a faint throb, a heartbeat, one that seemed to match her own. But it wasn't hers. It was deeper, stronger, more alive. The air was thick with the scent of rot. Jess's heart froze. The walls, they were lined, bones, layers upon layers of human bones, curled and stacked, some of them still wearing clothing. Shoes, long worn down, now brittle. The stench of death seeped from every crack. It hung in the air like a curse. Something in the darkness moved. Shadows didn't just pass by, they shifted. No light, but still they could feel it, the crawling presence. Jess's breath caught in her throat. The pulsing heartbeat grew louder. She couldn't tell if it was the cave or if it was the creature itself. Or worse, if it was something much older, much deeper, below. The air thickened. The ground trembled. And then, a whisper. "You should have left when you had the chance." Jess spun. No one was there. Then a figure appeared from the shadows, a dark silhouette. It was wearing the bones that covered the walls. The heartbeat rumbled beneath her feet. It came from everywhere. Then, just as quickly, the sound stopped, and a cold laughter followed. Not from the figure, not from anything real, but from the cave, from the very rock and dirt. And the bones were alive. You thought the worst was over. You thought the forest had shown its hand. But what comes next isn't just horror, it's revelation. Truth buried under ash, guilt clawing through skin, and something that doesn't just want you to see it. It wants to remember you. In the next chapter, the creature reveals its face, and what it's become is far worse than death. Memories warp, timelines fracture, and those who run in circles. You've made it this far, but the mountain hasn't finished with you yet. Part 2 descends next. And this time, it's already inside.